We'll close the chapter with the discussion of goods, that is, products versus services, including their different challenges and opportunities to improve quality. This includes the service dominant logic. And this section will look familiar to students who have taken other courses with me, since these ideas permeate operations, supply chain, and quality. Goods are products. They're physical and tangible, and they can be seen and touched. So they're experienced. Services, on the other hand, are intangible. They generally can't be seen. They generally can't be touched. However, they are still experienced. And again, think about your organization and your job. Does your organization make goods or services, or both? What do you make? Most of us make services, even when our organization makes goods. We generally think of outputs as a product or service, but most lie on a spectrum in between. For instance, cars are mostly a product, yet they also have services like GPS, satellite radio, and self-driving capabilities. Likewise, there's a physical side to car repair, the parts, but there's also a portion that's intangible with the mechanic and service itself. On the other end of the spectrum, education is more of a service, but products such as textbooks and videos are also part of the education. Software tends to be more of a service, but there's definitely a physical side to some pieces of software. And then a restaurant meal is perhaps a balance of both a product, the food, and a service experience of the restaurant and the staff. Which is more important to the U.S. economy, goods or services? And the clear answer is, well, both. Service jobs have significantly overtaken manufacturing and agricultural jobs, and this is not necessarily a recent change. It's actually been occurring for more than 100 years. And many Americans are convinced that we've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs and we don't make anything anymore here in the U.S. Well, yes, we have lost a lot of manufacturing jobs. However, we actually manufacture about as much as we ever have. While we did lose a lot of jobs to offshoring, such as to China, most of the job loss in manufacturing is a result of improved productivity, including automation. That actually sounds more like progress than a loss. And this is a massive, complex discussion that transcends this course. Overall, however, the production of both goods and services remains critical to the U.S. economy. It's interesting to consider the differences between producing goods and services, particularly in how value is delivered to customers. For instance, goods are generally easier to measure since they're tangible. Customer expectations are therefore likely easier to determine for products. Likewise, defects are easier to spot for products than for services. This makes it more difficult to consistently deliver value for services due to the inherent intangibility of those services. Also, production of services tends to involve more labor than production of products. And the problem with labor is the human element. Humans are inconsistent. We don't like inconsistency in quality. If human labor is variable, meaning that it's harder to control and standardize, the consistency of value delivery for services will become more problematic. And as another factor, co-production is when the customer is part of the production process. We'll see more on co-production shortly. Still, co-production is more likely for services than for goods. Having the customer involved in the production process will create further problems with consistency. That means standardization and control. That is, services can be more difficult, in particular more variable because the customer is involved in the production process. Similarly, correcting defects can be more difficult since the customer is directly involved with the defect. They're part of the defect. Ultimately, services seem to be easier to understand than goods, but value delivery and quality become more complex and less consistent with services. So services may actually be more difficult to produce than products, at least from a quality management perspective. One trend that we're currently seeing in industry is this idea of servitization, where an output that was typically a good is shifted towards more being a service. And one example is Peloton. Peloton still makes exercise equipment, which is a good, and that has been their historical focus. However, they now more emphasize classes, a service. As another example, Microsoft Office has shifted from being a one-time purchase via a download of a product to a recurring online service. And even some car companies, particularly high-end ones, offer car subscriptions where you pay a monthly recurring price that includes the car, insurance, maintenance, and even the ability to switch out the car to other models. Again, servitization shifts an output from a good towards being more of a service. And servitization, like a car subscription, thus moves outputs along the product service spectrum. It may also eliminate some outputs, like the car repair itself, at least in the case of the customer. These points demonstrate the complexity of outputs as most organizations produce a blend of goods and services, perhaps shifting some of these outputs along the spectrum to services to make value delivery more rewarding, but also significantly more complex. For instance, imagine a world in which we no longer own cars. Instead, we subscribe to self-driving automated car services, automated Uber. The US will still make cars, however, consumers will not directly buy them as goods. Instead, cars, including repair and insurance, may be mostly, if not pure, services. Let's extend this idea with the service-dominant logic. Remember that quality means meeting customer expectations for value. A traditional producer mindset focuses on building inherent value into products and services. The producer creates value, or at least the possibility of value, by building it into the products and services. The customer then experiences the value after the purchase. The service dominant logic, however, shifts the thinking to include the customer as a co-creator of value. And this idea is called co-creation. The customer is also part of the value creation process, not just the producer. In other words, the producer and the customer work together to create value. And this co-creation comes in two forms. One is co-production, value that the customer experiences from helping make the product or service. And number two, value in use, value that customers experience using the product or service. Considering co-production first, the customer is part of the production process, at least in some cases. Think of yourself customizing your order at a fast food restaurant or getting a haircut. The producer is creating your meal or haircut with you. This is co-production. We experience value from being part of the production process. So co-production is value created during the production process. However, it's not always applicable. So let's consider two examples. The first is with your cell phone. Did you co-produce your cell phone? In other words, were you there when your cell phone was produced? Well, of course not. So there was likely no co-production value which is the case for most products. You're not usually there when your products are made, so there's no opportunity for co-production value. Think about services, however, such as your education. Are you part of the production process for education? Well, yes. You're co-producing education right now. That may be more impactful for your face-to-face classes, but still occurs even as you learn and take notes during this recording. Co-production is typical for services. It's critical for services, though not necessarily products, although perhaps we could change that. Let's consider the second element of co-creation in value and use. This refers to the value that you get from using the product or service. So we experience value from using products and services, and value in use is value created after the production process as we use the products and services. Value in use means just that, the value that we get from using a product or service. As such, this is always applicable. Let's again apply this to the same examples. For your cell phone, you experience value, good or bad, every time you use it. I guarantee that you are better at using your cell phone than I am, so you get more value in use out of your phone. Think about your education, including your learning in this course right now. Do you apply ideas learned in your classes at your job? The more that you do so, the more value and use that you'll extract. I can help you pass your Lean Six Sigma certification exams. Still, I'm more interested in helping you stand out by implementing what we learned here. This is a higher level of value in use. With the service dominant logic, production processes extend to the customer. The customer is always involved in production and value creation, which makes them a quasi-employee, if you can stretch your mind like that. Additionally, value creation emerges over time rather than just as a one-time, one-off event. Co-production may just occur once, but value in use occurs over and over again as you use a product or service. Extending this, all producers are service providers. All organizations deliver a value creation experience, which is a service. The products and services that we create are merely mechanisms to create that value. Bob Kierlin, the late founder of Fastenal, emphasizes this point. Do not make the mistake of confusing your product for the device that delivers it. What he means is that products and services are merely mechanisms to deliver value. From my perspective as a teacher, people think that I'm in the education industry, and I certainly am, but the value that I really create is found in the impacts that you, the students, make in the workplace. Ultimately, the service dominant logic complicates how value is produced and delivered because the customer is generating value with the producer via co-production sometimes and value in use always. Still, the opportunity for value creation with the service dominant logic is higher. Organizations and their employees need to focus on the entire value creation process, including co-production and value in use. That is, how can we better include the customer in production via co-production, as well as enhance their value in use of our products and services. And this will deliver higher levels of value and quality that can differentiate us from the competition. Again, think about how this applies to your organization and your job. Can your organization enhance value by better applying concepts from the service dominant logic? More directly, how can you specifically enhance the value that you deliver to your customers by applying the ideas of co-production and value in use? Take me, for instance. Am I a better teacher than my colleagues? Well, not by nature. There are a lot more naturally gifted teachers in the Coles College. Nonetheless, I've applied service dominant logic ideas to be more effective than many of them. So sorry to boast a bit. We should always be humble. Still, carry some attitude with you so that you can and will create positive change.
Engage.
Use this service dominant logic idea as a reminder to engage in this course, to learn new ideas, challenge conventional thinking, and elevate your impacts at work. And this wraps up the chapter. Make sure to sync your notes with the learning objectives. Every quiz question is attached to a learning objective. Prepare your study guide around the learning objectives, and you should do fine on the quizzes.